Hey everyone, this is Tommy Von Voigt again, and welcome to episode 2 of Tommy's Tone Vault. The featured guitar today, 1984 Gibson Explorer Designer Series with the Union Jack paint scheme. Yes, now before I get started on this one, I just want to make mention of the fact that I'll be periodically looking over to the side here at my notes. I've got extensive bullet pointed notes, kind of, laying out the framework of the episode. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I didn't really do that for the first episode, which was for the '89 Gunslinger. And as a result, I'm kind of just winging the whole thing, and I forgot quite a lot. I made a lot of mistakes, which you'll notice, lots of overlays, text overlays, correcting myself. But the real big screw ups on my part were I neglected to properly mention Vince Michael at Vince Michael Guitars, who is the guy that helped me bring that thing back to life, recreated all the paintwork on the back, he worked miracles on it. I mentioned him briefly. I did not mention him enough. The reason why I know I did not mention him enough is because he told me several times. So mentioning him again now, sorry Vinny. I also neglected to properly credit Evan Gluck, who is the guy I use for most of my in-depth setup work. He's been a godsend in getting these things to really, the final finishing touch, get them to become actual playable guitars. So thanks, Evan. Sorry for not properly crediting you. A few other things I screwed up in that last video. I was referring to fretboard radius as degrees instead of inches, which is ridiculous. I refer to a fretboard radius of 12 degrees instead of 12 inches, 20 degrees instead of 20 inches. And I said it over and over again, and it wasn't until like a week later, and I just had one of those light bulb moments, and I was like, oh my God, did I say degrees? And I went back and I checked, and yeah, that's what I did. So, that's kind of a dingbat moment for me. What else did I forget? Well, just basically all the general corrections out throughout the video. So hopefully this will be a little bit less of just completely just pulling things out of thin air, and I won't make quite as many mistakes. But, oh, one other thing. There is a surprise twist coming regarding this guitar that we'll get to a little bit later in the episode, but I won't reveal it just yet. So, back to the guitar. Now, these Explorers are basically my favorite Explorers, and you're going to notice that they're different from your typical Explorers. If you're not hip to the 80s Explorers, you'll notice that there's no pick guard, and the controls are in a triangular configuration, rear-mounted controls. And these are known as EXP83. Now, interestingly enough, they actually ran from 84 to 87. They didn't launch them in 83. There is the V83, which was launched in 83 and also ran to 1987. So they're kind of sister guitars. The V83, like the EXP83, has no pick guard, rear-loaded controls, different control layout, and I just love them. I was never ever a fan of the pick guards on the Vs and the Explorers. So these things are they're just by far and away my favorite Explorers and Vs are the EXP83s and the V83s. Now, this is also one of the Designer Series guitars. Now, if you don't know anything about the Designer Series, Gibson was doing something really screwy in the early 80s where they were trying, I guess, to keep up with like the MTV era flashy guitars. So they launched the Designer Series, which appears to have run from 84 to 85. Although I did find one exception, which is a Designer Series Explorer bass from 1986 with a really unique perspective kind of black stripe kind of paint scheme going on. But anyway, so what the Designer Series was it was a series of like different kind of graphical treatments where it would basically be, they used like automotive pinstriping which is like just these series of like geometric designs and everything like that. And for the Explorers, they had Style 20, which was black with gold stripes and gold hardware. They had Style 21, which was white with blue stripes. And they had Style 22, which was white with gold stripes and gold hardware. They also had a bunch of hand-painted designs, which I think were billed as the Artist Series, and they actually seem to be signed. I've seen some of them that look like they're signed SS, like as if that's the artist initials. They are absolutely hideous. They're all hand painted, like really trippy, weird looking things where it just looks like they gave a child a paintbrush and let him loose in the Guitar Factory. And there's 6 different ones of those that I was able to identify: Blue Splash, Wavelength, Swirl, Fireworks, Galaxy, and Lido. They also had some other trippy styles. One was a camouflage style. I've seen some examples of that just has 2 humbuckers like the rest of the Designer Explorers. And I've also seen a really crazy version of the camouflage one that has 3 P90s. And I don't know who they were trying to sell a camouflage Explorer with 3 P90 pickups in it to, like, who they were trying to sell that to in like 1984 with a Kahler. It's insane. There's also the Matthias Jobs Custom Shop Edition, which I believe would be considered part of the Designer run. And that's, I think, 1985 only. And there are also the flag styles, which consist of the Union Jack, Stars and Stripes, which I think looks amazing, and to me looks like a 70s stuntman guitar. Like I look at it and I think Evel Knievel. Unfortunately, I showed it to some friends and they looked at it and they're like, Kid Rock. And I was like, well, that's enough of that one. And there's also, regretfully, a Confederate flag design. And the less said about that, the better. Now, I tried finding as much information out about these Designer Explorers as I could, because there's such limited information on the internet. I'm basically scouring forums and just finding people that are mentioning them. So I finally decided to write to Gibson themselves, and I said, hey, what kind of information can you give me on the Designer run and also the EXP83 and the V83, like production numbers, just any information you can. What are all the different styles? What do you have? And they got back to me, to their credit, fairly quickly. Less to their credit, the only information they actually had about the entire run of Designer Explorers and Flying V's was 2 PDF scans of magazine ads. That's it. They don't have any numbers. They have no production information. They've just got no records on them at all. So I've been left to just, my own devices, trying to figure out everything I could. I found the 86 Explorer base. As you can see, I'm still living near an airport. They've been ignoring my emails. Sorry. It looks like there was another model that was available for the Designer run. I don't really know what kind of guitar it is off the top of my head. I'd have to check the ads. Maybe I'll put it in an overlay. But I was able to actually find the guy that did these. And his name is Scott Fagan, or G. Scott Fagan, with Dynamic Designs Incorporated. The way I found this guy was on LinkedIn, believe it or not. He had his LinkedIn page, and he talks about how back in the early 80s, he was contracted by Gibson as a third-party vendor to create the Designer run, and that's it. I mean, I wish I had more information on these than I do, but I just don't. So what limited information I was able to find out, it appears as though they were all from 1984 to 1985, except for that lone base that I found. It appears they were mostly done on Explorers and Vs, and there was one other guitar you can get it on, although I've never seen a single example anywhere. Most of them appear to have been on EXP83 Explorers, although you will sometimes find regular Explorers with a pick guard and the standard Explorer control configuration that also have the Designer patterns on them. So that means that they were running the EXP83 Explorer line at the same time that they were running the regular Explorer line. Now, I haven't found any evidence that they did any of the regular style Flying Vs either at the same time as the V83 from 83 to 87, or that they did them with the Designer series graphics available to them. It appears as though, as far as I could tell, the V83 line was all you had to choose from 83 to 87, but if I'm wrong, please correct me in the comments. Now, some were stop-tail, like this, and some had Kahler trims, and the Kahlers, this is where it gets even screwier. Some of them look like they were the correct flat mount style Kahler you'd want to use, and some of them look like they are the kind of Kahler that is post mount, where you use the post for the tailpiece and the pneumatic bridge, and you actually mount the Kaler to that, and it screws down on the back post and just basically rests sitting on the front posts. And for the Flying V's, there's apparently a different style trem than the Kalers that you can also get on the designer runs. Like I said, it's really screwy. I found out everything I can, and there's not a whole lot of information out there. The one other thing that I could mention is the fretboards could either be rosewood or ebony, and it appears as though they were all alder bodies, maple necks. And that appears to not only apply to just the designer series, but also the EXP83 and V83 run in general. Now, you will sometimes see one of those for sale where the seller is claiming it's mahogany. I don't know if that's really true. It seems like that just might be wishful thinking on the part of the seller. Maybe they genuinely think that's the case. Maybe they're misinformed. Maybe they're misrepresenting it because they figure the mahogany guitar is going to be more valuable. I don't think they've got anything to back up that claim. But again, I could be wrong because information on these is so spotty. So spotty that, again, I don't even know how many of these were made. For example, it is claimed that they only made 50 of these. Now, I don't really know if that's true because it's just something I saw somebody posting on a forum somewhere, and any further mentions of it might have been people just regurgitating that information. Now, I first got hip to the designer series in general, particularly the Union Jack model, way back in the aughts. I want to think it was about 2008 or so. My dude Kyle Gaines, who was the lead guitarist in the band that I had down in Florida called Bad Magistrate for a while, he was a wheeler and dealer back in the day, probably still is. He's one of those guys that could trade anything for anything, and he would just come up with the most insane trade deals you can imagine. He would trade just absolute junk for vintage Marshalls. It was just crazy, you know, trading this guitar for that guitar, and he would just find himself getting the coolest stuff. And at one point he traded something, I forget what it was, maybe it was even like a JSAM 900 or something like that, traded for an 84 designer series Explorer with the Union Jack paint job. And my recollection of it was that it had a Floyd, but it was probably just my mind playing tricks on me. It probably wasn't a Floyd, it was probably a Kaler, and I just remembered it as having a floating trim. So I just fell in love with this thing. The second I saw it, I was like, oh my God, Def Leppard, which is a pretty weird reaction to have because Def Leppard never played an Explorer with a Union Jack on it. There's no association with those guys. But, you know, I saw this and I was thinking, you know, the photograph video, I'm thinking all the videos from the Pyromania record, which is just, you know, I don't know why my brain is doing that, but obviously Phil Collin played an Ibanez Destroyer, which is Explorer shaped, and, you know, the Union Jack shirt that Joe Elliott wore. So I just put the two and two together in my brain. I saw Kyle show up with this thing and I was like, Def Leppard! And I just fell in love with the damn thing. I really did. And I told Kyle, I was like, dude, please, if you get bored with that thing, if you want to trade it, if you want to sell it, please tell me first. Please give me an opportunity to get that thing from you because I really love it. Well, Kyle absolutely did not do that. He traded it again, and I don't know what the hell he got for it, but he didn't tell me. So completely, there's the one that got away, and I don't even know what the hell he traded it for. So probably something freaking ridiculous. Probably Kyle probably traded it for like a freaking solid state crate and a bag of goddamn jelly beans or some shit. I don't know. I mean, he did some really crazy things with his trades. At one point, he traded himself into one of those hand-built Keith Roscoe Super Strats from like the late 80s or the early 90s that had a paint job from Pamelina H, who's a famous painter from, you know, that painted a lot of guitars back in the day. Except this damn thing was a huge erect penis popping out over here with a woman, like a profile of a woman about to go down on it. And if you held the guitar like that, it looked like it was your penis. And then come to find out, it was a self-portrait of Pamelina H that Kyle reached out to her to confirm, and she was kind of like cagey about it. And he was like, well, do you want to buy this thing back from me so that, you know, it's not on the market anymore? And she just didn't want anything to do with the stupid guitar. And Kyle was stuck with this thing for like a decade. He referred to it later as his curse. Every time he tried to sell it, it would get flagged as porn on Craigslist. So not every trade worked out for Kyle. But yeah, so Kyle let this one get away from me, and unfortunately I ended up obsessed with it. like over time, I kept just thinking about that damn Union Jack Explorer that got away from me. So that's what led me to discovering more about the designer series and the Union Jack run, and people alleging that there's only 50 of them. Now, I don't really know if they only made 50 of these, but it doesn't matter, because here's the big twist. This isn't one of them. It's not a Union Jack Explorer, or at least it didn't start out that way. No, this one actually started out as Style 20, the black one with the gold stripes and the gold hardware. Now, before anyone loses their mind about the fact that I refinished the Designer Explorer into a different type of Designer Explorer, well, first, just blame Kyle if you really need somebody to blame, because it's his fault ultimately. But let's talk about the guitar this was made from. So, I found this on eBay back in September of 2019, and I got a really good deal on it. It was $1,000, and it clearly needed some work. And I was like, maybe if it's decent enough shape, I'll just leave it alone. But if it's really ragged out, I'll have it refinished as a Union Jack, and I'll finally scratch that itch. The reason why I was looking to do that is because the few listings I could find of an actual Union Jack Explorer, people were back in 2019 asking like ludicrous numbers. I saw them listed for $3,500, $4,000, $4,500 back in 2019. As you know, since then we went through COVID, and prices on everything that was vintage and used went absolutely out of control. If you see one of these listed now, people want $5,000, $6,000. They're out of their minds. And back in 2019, I simply wasn't going to pay $3,500 for something that was beat up. I just wasn't going to do it. So I found this one on eBay, and I was like, let's roll the dice, see, if I can leave it alone. If not, I know what I'm going to do with it. It shows up, and it was shot, so shot. Now, sadly, I don't have any of the pictures from the listing, because this was like the first guitar I really did the full Tommy treatment on. And I wasn't really forward thinking at the time. The listing's expired. I can't get the photos. The seller doesn't have an account anymore, so it's gone. But I can describe it in vivid detail. Mold. That's the best way to describe it. Mold. Now, it wasn't visible in the photos, but it absolutely stunk of mold. Mold to the point where it was like, is this toxic mold? Is this safe to even have in the house? It was so bad, the case was not salvageable. I had to throw the original 84 Explorer case in the trash because the mold was so bad. The only thing I could figure is this was stored in a humid garage, or it had spent 20 years in a basement that had been flooded. But it was so bad with mold, there was no salvaging it. It was still a functional, playable guitar. And one of the things that the seller had mentioned was that it had recently had a fret job, which we're going to circle back around to shortly. But other than that, it was just a lost cause. Guys, I'm telling you right now, if I didn't come along and do what I did to this thing, it was going to end up as firewood. You couldn't leave it as it was. You started having trouble breathing. It would make you cough if you were around it too long. So the only thing I could do was strip it completely down to nothing, let it air out for weeks, and then send it off to be refinished. It had to be stripped down to wood. It needed to be completely gone through and become a new guitar, basically. So what have I done with it? Let's see. Let's take a look at my notes here. So what I did was I reached out to Pat Wilkins. I actually reached out to a few different refinish guys, explained what I wanted to do, and I couldn't really find anybody really interested in taking on the case. Hit up Pat Wilkins out in Southern California, and his response was exactly what I was looking for. He's like, Tommy, I would love to take on this project for you. It sounds like a blast. So we went back and forth trying to figure out how to recreate the Union Jack pattern exactly, like as authentically as I possibly could, without one that I can directly compare to match colors to get everything right. What I was forced to do was find every photo I could online of one of these and recreate the pattern that way, blowing up photos, overlaying it on like on an Explorer body shape to make sure that all the lines landed on the cutouts the right way, that all the stripes landed in the right spot. I wanted to make sure that the stripes revealed as much, like when you look at the tone and volume knobs, I wanted to make sure they overlap the stripes in the right way, the pickup selector switch, everything had to land in exactly the same way that it does on an actual factory Union Jack paint job, which I got to admit, you do have a little bit of wiggle room here because they were all done by hand. So there's no way all the stripes were all laid down exactly identical. But what I did do is I found the best examples of photos online and I matched it to that. As far as the colors, what I had to do is I had to find the best photos I could, the clearest photos that looked like they had the least lighting condition issues. Brought those into Camera Raw, adjusted the white balance of them, and kind of averaged the blues, averaged the reds. And from that, I selected Pantone chips from the Pantone color book and used those for Pat Wilkins to match the blue and the red as best as we possibly could. And let's take a look what we have next here. So let's go over the guitar from headstock to body and all the parts. So as is typical when I go full Tommy on these things, every part is brand new from top to bottom, from headstock to body. Every part is brand new, the best of everything I could possibly throw at it. Now, we've got Schaller M6 locking tuners in nickel, which are my absolute favorite tuning machine. We've got a Tusq nut, brand new truss rod cover. Had to recreate the Gibson logo to go on top there. Now, as I had mentioned, this thing did apparently have a fret job before it got to me, so I didn't bother redoing the frets. Faber locking hardware, Faber locking bridge, locking posts, all new electronics from RS Guitar Works, 500K pots, new Gibson speed knobs, new output jack plate, new output jack. We've got, of course, strap locks. Now you'll notice I've got the strap lock on the back here. Now, all of the EXP83 Explorers that I found, including this one, had the strap button here. You will have neck dive if you leave it there. You have to relocate it back here. If you move your strap button here, you're solid gold. The balance is incredible. I had Pick Guardian make me a brand new control cavity cover. All new screws. Like I said, new hardware everywhere. We've got metal humbucking rings. All new screws here. The pickups. Since this was one of the first guitar projects I really dove headfirst into and got crazy with, I was kind of experimenting with different pickups in this thing. At first, I tried a super distortion in the bridge with, I believe, a DiMarzio PAF in the neck. And then I tried a transition in the bridge, and I switched to a humbucker from Hell in the neck. It was around this time I realized I'm really not into ceramic pickups. And that's the reason why I didn't like the stock Dirty Fingers pickups that came in this, because they're a hot ceramic pickup that they're actually very sought after. They're a collectible pickup, and I was able to sell those and recoup some of the money that went into this restoration and refinish. But I'm just not a ceramic pickup fan. So I decided I was gonna let's see how deep down the boutique rabbit hole we can jump. I don't know if anyone out there has heard of Zhangbuckers. Zhangbucker is a seriously cork sniffing pickup. There is a 2.5 month waiting period to get these things. What we've got is an O-Bucker in the bridge and a T-Bucker in the neck. And because of who I am as a person, I actually modified this bridge pickup. Now you might be saying, who in their right mind would modify a Zhangbucker? Me. The O-Bucker comes with an Alnico 3 magnet. And I rocked this thing for a while that way, but I eventually started feeling like it just needed a bit more ass, it needed more push, it needed a little more something special in the mids. So I actually modified this O-Bucker with an Alnico 8, just to really just give it that extra little push over the cliff. So, what are the problems with this thing? Now, when I did the Gunslinger video, I kind of was wrapping things up and I was like, well, what are the issues? What are the things that I don't like? And there were really none. This is an example of a guitar that does have some issues. There are things about it I'm not happy with, things that I regret, and I'm just going to be completely honest with you about them. So, when you refinish a guitar and you go with a poly finish, the great thing is you don't have to ever worry about the white paint yellowing, and it's a lot stronger, but you can kiss your serial number goodbye. I could still see it if I catch the light just right, but it is not any kind of deep stamp like you would get with the factory nitro finish. Another issue with this thing, this was initially really prone to atmospheric changes. Temperature, humidity, this thing, the tuning would fluctuate like crazy. It seemed like the action would constantly change on me. It was just a really inconsistent guitar at first. It eventually kind of started behaving, and now it's actually reasonably well behaved. But what that leads me into next is, if you zoom in closely, you will see that this edge of this fretboard has no finish on it at all. Normally you would have clear coat on the side of the fretboard. The reason for this, I want to say about 7, 8, 9 months after the refinish was done and the whole thing was all back together, right around the 12th fret or so, I saw that the clear coat was actually pulling away from the fretboard. It was just a little bit right around the end of the fret. And of course, that really freaked me out because it was the first thing I was going to see. You know, my eyes were immediately drawn to it. It was a glaring imperfection. And then it got worse and worse and worse and worse, to the point where all up and down the fretboard, right at the edge of all the frets, the clear was pulling away, and it was leaving a pocket between the clear coat and the fretboard itself. I was confused, I was upset, I didn't know what to do. I was like, is it because it's an ebony fretboard and you can't put clear on an ebony fretboard? I don't know. I mean, I was still new to this whole thing. It got so bad that at one point it actually chipped right up here and took a little piece of the blue finish with it. Now, fortunately, I saved that, set that aside. I hit up my dude Gabe Mera, who's a luthier here in New York City. Does a lot of setups and repairs. And I was like, Gabe, is there anything you could do to help me out here? I got to do something. This is making me crazy. It makes the guitar look absolutely hideous. And he said the best thing he can come up with is if he very, very, very carefully taped the finish itself off and painstakingly sanded away the clear from the edge of the fretboard, and then repaired that little chip as best he could and polished that out. So you don't see the finish, the clear coat pulling away from the frets anymore, but unfortunately there is a ridge where the finish stops and then it steps down to the fretboard. And I was talking to Gabe and I was like, Gabe, what the hell is the deal with this thing, man? Like, you know, it's so prone to atmospheric changes. It's, you know, this thing with the clear coat, is it because of the fretboard material? Is it because this thing was clearly in moist conditions for so long? And Gabe says to me, he's like, you know, it could even be there's a Friday guitar. I was like, a Friday guitar? What the hell do you mean? He's like, well, you know, the joke is that if you don't want a Friday Gibson because those are the ones that they put the least amount of love and care into, because it was Friday, it's the end of the week, it's the end of the day, they just wanted to punch out and go to the bar. So if you get a Friday guitar, it's gonna really be a shit one. And I was like, that's ridiculous. But on my way home from Gabe's, I actually ran the serial number again. It turns out, because you can actually figure out the day of the week that a Gibson was made in the 80s, yes, this guitar was built on a Friday. But honestly, I don't know. I really doubt that's the thing. If I had to hazard a guess as to what was wrong, what I think is that the fret job was just a shit fret job, and the frets are just too wide. Full stop. I think they just extend too far past the edge of the fretboard. Now, we're not talking like they extend a 1/16 of an inch, but just enough that you could feel it. And that's just enough that when humidity causes the wood to expand and contract, the frets don't. And that was pushing the clear coat away from the edges of the frets. It ruined the finish on the edge of the fretboard. And if you look at the bottom, you can see it is happening there as well. So what can be done about this? Well, Vince Michael of Vince Michael Guitars, well, I'm mentioning you, Vinny, when I told him that I removed the finish from the edge of the fretboard, he's like, oh, you shouldn't have done that, man. I could have wicked some crazy glue in there. It would have been fine. I'm doing my best Vinny impression. Just imagine there's a goat next to me and just talk like that and you're good to go. But I don't know, man. I don't know if I mean, Vinny is good. Vinny's damn good. I don't know if anyone is good enough that they could have saved the clear on the side of the fretboard if every single edge of the fret was pushing the clear away, as you can see on the bottom here. So I really truly think that the only saving this thing is if I decide I want to, I'm going to have it refretted properly, and the clear is going to have to be redone on the edges of the fretboard. That's the only way I'm going to actually be able to fix this, and that's just what it is. So, you know, you could kind of say that this is not technically a complete guitar yet, but I'm doing the video on it anyway, because if I go ahead and do that and redo the frets and redo the clear, it's still going to look the same. So for all intents and purposes, it's not going to change. And that's pretty much it. It's stable now. It plays great. I can't really say I have any regrets. I just, other than God, I wish I had redone the frets. I really do, because I've had Gabe do several fret jobs for me. He did my 85 Explorer, he did my other 84 Explorer, he did my 83V. No issues with any of those. So that's what I should have done. I didn't. It's a learning experience. What can you do? But that's my 84 Explorer. It's a Union Jack clone. It scratches the itch. It's still a designer series. I know that I'm going to get a lot of haters for having refinished it. What are you going to do? If you've watched this far and you've heard me explain to you why I had to do it and you still have a problem with it, blame Kyle. Let me know in the comments. Should I invoice Kyle for the expense I put into this guitar? Because ultimately it's his fault. Leave in the comments, what do you think Kyle traded that 84 Explorer for back in the day? Did he trade it for a box of broken tube screamers and a tuna sandwich? I mean, it could have been anything. Let me know what you think Kyle traded that Explorer for all those years ago, and I'll make sure Kyle watches the video. But otherwise, keep rocking out there, and I'll see you next time for the next video. Bye.